Hey everyone, welcome to week 8. So we are moving along. Hopefully you have been having some fun planning an environmental education outdoor lesson. So we are finishing up this week. You can see here that's your only assignment due this week. And to help guide you, I have created the to-do list for you to take a look at. And so this week it says finish up your environmental ed lesson planning. This is going to be due March 5th. All students must upload a copy, even if you worked with a group. I need an individual submission from each of you on Canvas. That's where you'll put it. And important to note, your submission should include copies of any materials like your notebook page, information on your trade book, any other instructional materials you reference within your lesson plan. So if you're showing a video, you need to have that linked. If you're going to have students do some sort of assessment, in addition to your notebook page, like for instance, if they were going to fill out data on a data table, you would need to include that. So this lesson should be written up and include everything a teacher would need to walk in and teach this lesson. So what you will submit is this template that I've provided. It's on Canvas. It's also in the Google Drive. And you're going to write up your lesson plan using all the information that you have worked with your group or worked on in the last 2 weeks to try to put together, and pulling in information that we have talked about across class for the last several weeks. So, for instance, in the first part it says formal or informal assessment of prior learning or pre-assessment. So thinking about what you've learned in our class about getting students prior knowledge, preconceptions, misconceptions. A good idea here would be to think about, is there a Paige-Keeley probe, or is there a way that I can create a pre-assessment that would actually find out what prior knowledge or misconceptions students might have already about this topic. And then you're going to make sure to include a copy of that. So here's the activity title. Hopefully everybody recognizes and understands that you have to start with a PLT activity for this lesson. You cannot just create your own lesson from scratch. You have to start with one of the Project Learning Tree activities out of your text. Okay, so then you're going to identify any standards that you are addressing. So the NGSS standard and the literacy standard I've already given you. Those are on previous assignments. This is the central focus is just a real brief description of what you're talking about in the lesson, what your students are going to learn. So any science vocabulary here that they will need to learn for the lesson, and then a strategy. So thinking about an explicit strategy for how you're going to teach that in the lesson. So you may decide to have students use word wall or sentence frames, or give them concept cards that have vocabulary, or have them track vocabulary in their notebook as they encounter it. So all of those are strategies that you could use for teaching academic language. Just make sure whatever you identify here is also included in your description of the lesson down here. Your learning targets. In this section, you will also include the safety guidelines that you have indicated on your previous documents. I will give you feedback on those. Make sure you review my feedback on your learning targets, and you incorporate that when you post those on the lesson plan. You have to list all materials. You have to actually talk about how many of each thing you need per student, per group, and identify if you're going to be using groups. And then the 5E instructional model is going to guide your the way you move through the lesson. And so you might have to go way back to week 3. We had some materials that address this. So particularly this one, the 5E model of instruction. This is a graphic. And so you may want to go back and look at these definitions, think about the teacher behavior, the student behavior, and try to incorporate that in your lesson as you explain your activities. So you want to set up your lesson to be an inquiry, which means it should mirror or be connected to the steps in this process, where these are more student-centered and student-driven activities and lessons. So for to go back to the lesson plan, so for this section, and you're going to want to actually identify. So this is my engage phase. So in the engage phase, I really want to hook the students, get them interested. So I probably don't want to start out with, explaining what we're going to be covering in the lesson. Maybe I start out with my trade book and we're going to read a story. Maybe I start out with a demonstration where they get to see something really cool scientifically happen, and then they're like, oh, what just happened? Something like that. Okay, and then you don't necessarily have to have all of these in one lesson, and it's hard to incorporate all 5. So what I would like to see at the minimum is the engage, explore, and evaluate. You need at least those 3. So you can see within this template, I've included some descriptions of what should go here. So in the left-hand side here is what the teacher does. In the right-hand side is what the student does. And you will see from that graphic on the engage model that students should be doing a lot more than the teacher is doing at this, if you are actually doing an inquiry lesson. So this column should have a lot more detail than this one. You do need to incorporate a formative assessment. So how are you checking sometimes through the lesson how your students are doing and if they're understanding? So these can be informal or formal. So for instance, you can just have a class discussion. That would be informal. Formal would be you'd actually connect this to like an exit ticket, a Kahoot, something where you're getting student information. It could be that they're filling out a notebook page and you're checking halfway through on their notebook pages to make sure that they are understanding what they're doing. That is what is most commonly used for this formative assessment. And then how will you evaluate it at the end? And this is the final product for the activity that the students will be completing. Usually that includes your notebook page and any, like if they're doing some sort of experiment, the conclusion of the experiment. So I've also provided, and make sure so this is the blank form for you to actually type in. And then at the end here, here's a checklist for you to make sure you're following and incorporating everything that should, so we're taking everything from class so far to build these lessons. So check these off before you turn it in just to make sure that you have everything included. So that is your assignment for this week, and this is going to take, again, as I mentioned, you have a lot of this. You'll be able to just copy and paste from the last 2 weeks, and but you will be writing additional descriptions, creating any materials for the lesson, and attaching those. And I would prefer that you put all of that at the end of the lesson plan rather than submitting separate documents for the lesson. It's easier for me to review if they're all in one document, and then I'm less likely to miss something that you've included. So you can create them separately, but then copy and paste your materials, your assessments into the lesson plan document and submit it all as one document. You can include links rather than pages if you create something, or for instance, you're showing a video, you can just link it in the lesson plan. Or if you use Google Docs, you can link those documents within the lesson plan. That is acceptable as well. You will find a copy of this in our Google Drive under week 8. So if you want that to use to type, it's there. And so lastly, again, this is due March 5th. If you have worked on this or are working on this with your group or a partner, each person has to submit a separate document, and then moving forward, you want to read through and watch the materials under week 8 under the reading section. We are going to, these are the materials I'm referencing. Those are going to prepare you and get you, provide background to what we're going to start next week, which is we're going to be doing an engineering STEM lesson. So that will be our next product. So that's it for this week. If you are struggling, you have questions, please email me, sign up for office hours. I'm happy to give more instruction if needed. Good to be back, and hopefully I'll be able to get your previous lessons documents graded so you have those to help you with this planning this week.